Hey. What's going on, y'all? It's Brian. So I sat there and I kind of reviewed my last night's live stream, and I wasn't 100% happy with how it turned out. And one of the reasons was um, I had reached pretty much the end of my attention for the day. Um, I had exhausted all my resources, all my stores of being able to think in a coherent straight line, and so I feel like I missed a couple of opportunities on last night's live stream to really put some context behind some of the thoughts I was kind of putting out there. Plus, I wanted a chance to go back and actually pull some research that I've done to include it in my notes to give a little bit more teeth to some of the arguments that I'm going to be making. So tonight we're going to talk about beef rap, or today, this afternoon, we're going to talk about beef rap, full contact hip hop. Um, we're going to talk about the diaspora wars that are happening on Twitter, and kind of give a little bit of shape and form to my position on it. We're going. Last week we talked and made the connection between um, the administration and Mojo world. If those that don't know, Mojo is a recurring X-Men villain. And so I'm going to do a quick character issues on Mojo and kind of explain who he is. And so that's what we got. And then a couple of other kind of nerdy, ranty kind of things. First things first. I want to talk about one of the things that's been really interesting. And we're about a year, over a year removed from the entire Drake Kendrick thing. Um, One of my guilty pleasures is sitting down and watching reaction channels on YouTube where younger hip hop heads are going back and listening to older hip hop. It just it makes me happy. It shows that there is staying power in the culture, and watching younger fans go back and realize that MCs have always been MCs, and I really do appreciate it. But one of the things I've noticed is whenever one of the artists in one of these songs from the 80s or 90s name drop somebody else, instantly the hosts of these shows think that it's a diss or they're dissing somebody. And I have a theory that I'm kind of hashing out, I'm kind of working through. Um, and so one of the things I will say is I think that we had this rise in kind of passive aggressive hip hop where if somebody had an issue with another person, they talk all around it. They wouldn't necessarily say their name. You would have to go through all these layers of subtext to understand who they were referring to. And we kind of disguised it as, oh, they're being clever or witty or whatnot. Really, it's just avoiding the conflict as it is. And so I want to talk a little bit give a little bit of shape around the history of hip hop beef from my perspective. And there are elements of it that I may be aware of, elements of it that I may not be aware of. So give me a little bit of grace on it. Okay. But one of the things is when it came to beef, and there's beefs that y'all didn't even know about, like the entire Rakim and EPMD thing when they were trading bars going back and forth, it got contentious in the way that there might be a fist fight or an argument, but not contentious in somebody's going to die tonight, somebody's going to get shot. And so we need to draw a couple of lines in the sand. Okay. Historical rap beef is rival MCs wanting to show that they're the best. Hip hop is competitive, it's a full contact sport. Um, and that competition has always been kind of a good thing. It's both equal parts competitive and collaborative. Okay. Um, and to understand the origins of hip hop was born um of the generation of black kids that didn't have access to instruments, didn't have access to fancy studio equipment, and so you were really left to create music the only way that you could, which is break beats, sampling, and things along those lines, things that were readily available. um and you could create music with that. And so I know a lot of people have issue with the origins of hip hop and sampling and all the other stuff. Understand it was people adapting to an environment or a situation that they were currently in, and they wanted to express themselves and tell their stories in their own way, or just have a good time and bring some light and levity to other people. All right. And so when we talk about the origins of hip hop, um, part of that party culture that was associated with hip hop came battling. You had to show you were better than the other cat on the mic, and that was just kind of how it went. You had to be able to show that you can engage the crowd more, you can get the party moving a little bit better. And when we talk about the different elements of hip hop, there's been DJ battles, there's been b-boy battles, graffiti crews have been battling, and so each layer of it has a layer of competition. So competition is kind of woven throughout the culture. All right. That's very important to understand as we go through this. Just because there's competition in something doesn't mean that it has to escalate to violence. And I think specifically our lens of what hip hop beef really means got tilted with the Pac and Biggie thing. And so I'm gonna go into that. Again, this is my take on this. All right. So um Tupac and Biggie kind of was an example. It was an exceptional and amplified case, but it wasn't the norm of rap beefs. More times than not, it was people firing, bars on record or whatnot. It might start a fist fight, but it wasn't. People are going to get killed. A lot of the stuff, and you guys got to understand. So, with the birth of hip hop, the way that they capitalized hip hop, the way that these independent imprints started up, where it was artist controlled. A lot of that had to do with the fact that the people that had the money, that were also adjacent to a lot of the hip hop heads, were hustlers. And so there was an element of, from the label standpoint, there was a level of an intersection between the entertainment side and the street side, and a lot of street cats were able to step into that space and that vacuum, and some of them legitimized, and were able to move away from the street stuff, and other people just brought the infrastructure that they had in the streets to the record labels. And so there's that element, where we're talking about beefs and crews and drug money and all that other stuff. That element is a real thing, but it was regional and it operated in its own kind of sphere. Because you had the rappers on one end who were the kind of the public face and out in public and everybody knew them. And then behind the scenes, you had some hood cats, some hustlers and stuff like that, jockeying for position and jockeying for power. And so in the backdrop of it, you did have some drug trade stuff going on. And there's a lot of documentation, a lot of MCs, older MCs you can listen to. You can go back and listen to some old episodes of Combat Jack. Combat Jack will absolutely, the old episodes, recipes Combat Jack. The old episodes of Combat Jack will put you onto a lot of things that you did not know were happening, specifically in the New York hip hop scene. But there were some other things that were happening in California, some stuff that was happening in Texas, Louisiana, even Midwest stuff. And so, but Combat Jack's going to give you a good sense of what was happening in the scene back in the days. Okay. But yeah, there was always a street element, but one wasn't requiring the other one, if that made sense. So when we have Biggie and Pac, in my estimation, these are my opinions here. I see Biggie and Pac had a public falling out as associates and acquaintances. And we could even say friends. They had a falling out. I think the falling out was exacerbated by two gigantic egos that were behind in the shadows of this. You had Suge Knight with Death Row Records. You had Diddy, Puffy, Puff Daddy, whatever you want to call him, Sean Combs with Bad Boy Records. Okay, and make no mistake, Suge Knight was the gangster. Puffy was gangster. Puffy, yes, he did a lot of A&Ring and stuff like that, with Uptown Records and things along those lines, and that's really how he got on. He is responsible for a lot of artists having a mainstream spotlight, instrumental. Realistically, if you want to talk about one of the most instrumental figures in hip hop and R&B, specifically with, um, you know, um, was it New York Go Go, Harlem Go Go, or a New Jack Swing? New Jack Swing, that New Jack Swing sound. Heavy D is probably one of the most important figures in 90s era music, 90s era black music, because Uptown Records, him, Andre Harrell, and all them introduced a lot of our juggernauts of that era. You had Mary J. Blige, you had your Jodeci. A lot of those guys came through that little pipeline, and Diddy worked his way up. His dad was a hustler and stuff like that, and so that was part of the mentality. And Diddy was always kind of a sociopath. Like, you can go back and watch some of the old interviews. You can see how he interacts with people, how he treated his artists and stuff specifically. Biggie was kind of his cash cow. Um, and I earnestly believe that had Pac and Biggie survived, we would have seen, one, them squash the beef. Two, they would have done some collaborative stuff. We would have seen Biggie and Jay-Z kind of go off on their own and form, the, um, their group, the Commission, and you would have Biggie and Pac, you would have Pac featured on tracks and stuff like that. Like, they would have gone the grown man route, similar to the Jay and Nas thing, where they decided to let's put this competition to beef aside, and let's go make this money thing. I think had Biggie and Pac survived this thing, we would have seen more collaboration, just based on some of the stuff I've seen with Pac Screw the Outlaws and some of the beefs that they squashed and things along those lines, and some background stuff that had been going on and stuff that had been mentioned. I do earnestly believe that had they survived long enough outside of all this other street stuff that was happening underneath all of this, I think we would have seen some collaboration. But that becomes a shining example of rap beef turned tragic. And realistically, a lot of this stuff was escalated by the egos of Suge and Diddy. Had it been left alone, we would have seen the disses fly back and forth between Pac and Biggie. They had been on the outs for a while, and then I think we would have seen the olive branch, and they would have come together. Okay. And so we ended up losing context about what rap beef was. Initially, it was just about friendly competition. Sometimes it was unfriendly competition, but it wasn't people weren't going to get killed over the record side of it. Now we talk about the street side of it, where you had a lot of these imprints that started up, and these drug dealers that got into the music game. They saw hip hop as their entry point into the music game to kind of legitimize. There was violence in that aspect of it, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that. Like I said, if you want a source on it, go back and listen to some old Combat Jack stuff and just listen to how these cats talk about who's who in the streets and whatnot. Okay. What we saw was kind of a collapse of context. Okay. Social media eliminated the distance between artists and fans, and artists found themselves in a position where they always have to be on. Okay. And always being on means that the lyrics that they tell, which may be retellings of stories of people that they know, they may be stuff that they personally experienced. They always have to be that character that their fans imagine them to be. Okay. And what you see is, to me, you start seeing somebody get lost in the character. I think Tupac got lost a little bit in the character. I think, I'm not saying that he was faking. I'm not saying that he was pretending to be something that he wasn't. I think these are aspects of who he was, but you guys also got to remember he's a classically trained actor. Biggie with the Frank White stuff, Biggie was a corner boy, and drug dealer, low level petty crimes and stuff, but his persona on albums, as he got older and stuff, the Frank White, the kingpin mafioso kind of stuff, that was part of the image that he cultivated, but that wasn't necessarily who he was, as aspects of who he was. What I'm starting to see now is these rappers feel like they constantly have to live and embody this image. And I'm not just talking about new cats, I'm talking about guys that 30s and 40s still feel like they have to maintain a specific image of who they are on record in order to have that authenticity. And since social media has brought them in closer proximity where they're almost under constant surveillance by their fans, that's what we see is how they act. This is how they navigate the world. Okay. And it's kind of a shame that there is no emotional distance between fans and stuff. Because what happens is you get two rappers that are beefing, the fans do the parasocial thing, take sides, and that's where violence escalates. I remember, was it last year, the entire Drake and Kendrick thing where somebody shot up either one of Drake's homeboy's house or even shot up Drake's house or something along those lines. And instantly everybody thought it was Kendrick. Come to find out, it was some stuff with the Weeknd's crew, because him and Drake weren't getting along. And that's where fans get wrapped up into it and taking sides, and you do get some people that are willing to crash out over that. And I'm talking about crash out in the sense of people are willing to ruin their lives behind protecting the honor of said rapper, which is ridiculous. So in the drill era, you had more name dropping where now it does actually turn violent, where somebody drops a name to disrespect somebody's dead homie or some other rapper that got killed, and next thing you know, that rapper's dead. That's where we start seeing that really hardline blending of people talking crazy on record and people acting crazy in real life. Not a good thing. And since we don't have a narrative, since we have adults that are so swept up in this thing that they think all this stuff is real, the kids don't have a chance to kind of parse, hey, this is kind of this is somebody acting a role or acting a character. Okay. But fan interpretation, performance started reading as the autobiography. People thought that this is who they really are. Okay. And it's not just the fans who thought that this is who they really are. Okay. And so that's what happened. And so what I'm saying is this: hip hop has always been a full contact sport, y'all. But this idea that rap beef always leads to violence is kind of it's atypical, or it was atypical. Until we had artists and fans who think that the reality has what people say on records has to be a 1-for-1 translation of what these artists are, instead of these characters. When it came to hair metal, nobody expected these hair metal bands to be as party animal as they were on record. Okay, but hip hop, that's what the expectation is. And let's look at it this way. When I was coming up, a lot of the rappers, a lot of the rap crews and rap groups and stuff like that, these were college educated dudes. I think Lords of the Underground met in college. A lot of them connected through college. E40 went to Grambling, if I'm not mistaken. And so when you listen to like Scarface talk, he's a super articulate, soft-spoken kind of dude. There was a connection where we were like, oh, E40 is a smart dude. We didn't expect E40 to be on that ignorant shit that sometimes may have been on the records, because we knew the records were the records and the person was the person. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. So let's start pivoting a little bit into how we consume information online, because this goes into the next talking point I have with the Diaspora wars and stuff like that. Okay. What we're seeing now is we're starting to see context collapse stuff into political conversation. Like we're starting to see context being removed from political conversations and people are just saying anything. Standards of evidence are screenshots and clips versus archival research, census data, and things along those lines. Okay. And, people end up utilizing their lived experience instead of kind of academic and research rigor that's applied to it. Okay. And we're starting to see, like, specifically when we're talking about how we discuss specifically history of Black folks in America. Um, there's this weird movement that wants to alter aspects of Black history to essentially cut us off or remove us from Africa, or remove Africa from our history, or say it happened so long ago that the connection has essentially been severed by time. And to me, that's kind of a ridiculous thing. And it kind of started, I'll be honest with you. If you only use movies like Hidden Colors as the only your only source of information regarding Black history, then you are utilizing a flawed source. Hidden Colors, Buck Breaking, not a shot at Tariq Nasheed as much, but um, the a lot of the stuff contained in those films is a mix of actual things that did happen, ahistorical events, parables that people are telling like they're actually real things that happened. And you're seeing this blend of things, and they don't necessarily cleanly delineate between what is proven through historical records and anthropologists and things along those lines versus this is just this person telling a parable that's um, and not really addressing the fact that it's kind of a parable or a hodgepodge of stories that they've seen or experienced. Okay, I'm saying all that to say this. Challenges to claims are often framed as personal attacks. This is important. This is an important piece as we move into when we start talking about the effects of imperialism across diaspora, across the African diaspora. Okay. And if I'm mispronouncing it, please forgive me. That is one of those, like, you know how sometimes you get words that you hear, but your mouth just won't say them the right way. And so that's just kind of how that word is for me. Okay. So we're going to talk about imperialism and the African diaspora, whatever. Um, so a lot of times when we have misunderstandings, and so for those that don't know, when I talk about the African diaspora, I'm talking about people that were formerly their ancestry traces back to Africa, specifically the western coast of Africa. But it can be across Africa. People that are of African descent that aren't in Africa and are in Africa. So we're talking about around the world. Okay. And so one of the things we need to understand is the role of colonialism in the way that it shapes our experience as citizens of individual countries. Okay. So um, our perspective of the world as Black Americans is shaped by the Black American historical experience, through the triangle slave trade, through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and what we're dealing with on the modern digital age kind of stuff. That's going to shape our perspective of stuff. It's going to shape our perspective and our relationship to power, because that's what a lot of this comes down to. Okay. Black Americans find themselves in a position where we exist in a country that is always kind of through legal means, through artificial means, and then just by way of practice has always put us on this bottom rung of society where whoever comes in after us enjoys, they get to be viewed as, well, at least they're not down here with the Black folks. And I do have evidence to kind of back this up. So if we look at how Italian immigrants came into America, and we need to understand the concept of how we classify different races and things like that in America. One of the things we need to look at is this. So all immigrants that came from European countries or the European were not considered white when they first came over to America. Okay. Irish people for a long time weren't considered white. Jewish people weren't considered white. Italians were not considered white. Okay. Then we get into Persians. We get into places across the world that were not considered white, even though by the eye test, you would consider them Caucasian, but they weren't considered white in this country. And so I'm talking specifically narrowly about Italian immigrants. When Italian immigrants came over, they're forced into community with Black people because they weren't allowed to live in the white neighborhoods. um, and if you want a record of this, go back and look at turn of the century era soul food cookbooks, specifically from specific regions down south like Louisiana, Mississippi, place in Alabama. Um, you know, you're going to in some of these cookbooks, you're going to find your typical soul food fare, and then you're going to find stuff like spaghetti. The reason why is there was a crossing of culture. There was a cultural exchange that happened between the two. And so that's why a lot of modern day food down in New Orleans has an Italian touch and an Italian flair and an African flair and a Spanish flair, because you had these communities that had collapsed into one another, that were forced to be next to each other due to proximity. But then when there was a need for resources or labor or even investment capital, all of these people that weren't considered white ended up kind of getting promoted up to white and being allowed to live in the white communities, but Black people were still left in the community that they had always occupied. They were still segregated in the Black part of the community, while a lot of other groups were allowed to move away and kind of integrate more with white folks. That's really what's happened. Like, and so when we talk about it, it's going to shape our perspective of power, how we perceive um, immigrants, and things along those lines. I will be the first to admit that there's a disconnect between Black Americans and um, you know other groups within the diaspora, and a lot of it has to come with how Black people in America um, are still kind of under that power. When I look at other colonial projects around the world, let's look at like Nigeria or whatnot. And there are still fingerprints of the British Empire in Nigeria. Never forget that piece of it. But um, they went through a whole arc of liberation, getting out from under the colonialism, to the point where you have people that are our age who don't really have a clear memory of what it was like to live under British rule. And so when they see Black folks in America, they forget that, okay, I'm dealing with a population that had to make a lot of alterations to the way that they exist and the way they maneuver through society, um, i.e., like code switching and things along those lines, in order to survive in the society that they currently live in. Okay. Um, and the negative things that you hear, you hear Nigerian folk talk about how their parents talk about Black people and all this other stuff, Black Americans. um a lot of it is just not understanding that we're in different phases of colonialism and imperialism. Like, we're in different phases of it. um I've seen it interacting with Black folks from Britain, who uh a lot of them have made the choice to move from countries where Black people occupy all the seats of power. They decided to actually move to Britain and move to the seat of imperialism, and they're going to have a unique perspective on things. And so when we start talking about things that are uniquely the Black American experience, and since the Black American experience has been capitalized and monetized and exported all around the world, you have people that are taking elements of Black American culture and retrofitting it to their Blackness or their culture. So that's why you have the drill scene over in the UK, the drill music scene over in the UK, and a lot of Afrobeat stuff. There's a hip hop element to it. But a lot of times when you have different elements of the the Black diaspora talking and communicating with each other, what's happening is we're talking past each other a lot of times. These will be small disagreements that blow into full-fledged arguments just because we are existing in different phases of colonialism, different phases of imperialism, to have different histories or whatnot. And sometimes that's going to shape how we interact and how we talk to one another. Okay. So misunderstandings are rooted in different colonial experiences, not moral failure. And it's always been kind of the thing where, you have all these systems of oppression that have existed historically in America, but somehow, some way, Black people are to blame for them and blame for the outcomes. Okay. And so Black Americans find themselves in a permanent caste system. There was no liberation arc. Okay. The best we had was integration and things along those lines. But in Nigeria or whatnot, they had they had the ability, Algeria, they had the ability to all overthrow like French rule, Haiti, all these other places actually had an entire story that went along with their liberation and the history since then. Okay. And so Black folks have had to kind of develop this dual consciousness to survive in two different lanes in America. Okay. And W.E. Du Bois said this. It's a particular sensation, the double consciousness, two souls, two thoughts, two unrecorded strivings. It's from the souls of Black folk. I mean, we're talking about a dual consciousness. All right. And other diaspora groups, often it was a temporary occupation, and so they had to acclimate in different ways. And sometimes that differential acclimation to the environment in the world that you grew up in will create different outcomes, and it will create different perspectives. Okay. So the question of choice, Black ancestry is deliberately scrambled. I don't know how I don't think people understand how jarring it is, because right now I'm going through a lot of family tree kind of stuff and building out the family tree. I don't think people quite understand how jarring it is to be able to trace your family history back to a certain point and then have to go and find plantation records where you see members of your family who are recorded like livestock. It's jarring. And I don't think people quite appreciate that. They say, oh, it happened, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But to go back and have to sift through plantation records and see that people that may have looked like you or may carry your eyes or your mouth shape and stuff were logged and recorded as livestock is a very, very sobering experience. And it is a unique experience for Black Americans. Okay. Now there are some Native Americans and people in the First Nations up in Canada that can have a parallel experience, but being able to see that your ancestors are herded like livestock is a different thing. And don't bring in the indentured servant thing, because I can tell you that indentured servitude was not the same thing as chattel slavery. It wasn't even close. So it's a jarring experience. Okay. And it does shape a perspective. Okay. And so our ancestry is deliberately scrambled. I don't know what my country of origin is. I have an idea of a specific place in Africa, but understand these lines and these national lines weren't clearly delineated at the time. And so I have an idea of what area I might have come from, but specific country of origin, specific tribe, specific native language, no idea. Meanwhile, I know friends that can trace their family history all the way back to the 1600s in Florence, Italy somewhere. And it's not a big deal to them. It's like, who cares? But for me, when your ancestors are logged as livestock, that's a very jarring experience. Okay. So now we're gonna move the conversation a little bit more modern and talk about online, specifically the manifestation of anti-immigrant sentiment and how it was kind of seeded within the Black community, and kind of use it to splinter the diaspora. That word will befuddle me until I go to my grave. Okay. So there are specific concerns, and a lot of the anti-immigrant sentiment. And I need y'all to understand this. And I'm not trying to belittle anybody's intelligence. I'm not trying to remove anybody's autonomy. So I need y'all to understand when I say this. A lot of the anti-immigrant stuff that you see proliferating online in Black spaces, it was seeded, it was fed by a right-wing think tank. Not saying the right-wing think tank is automatically, they are the producers of all aspects of it, but the seeds of it, the money of it, and there are some connections to some of this stuff. Okay, they found that if they could get Black people to be anti-immigration, that was kind of a wedge issue that they can use to chisel off a specific segment of Black voters. And then the way they phrased it was, well, we're talking about labor and wages, because those are real material issues, and they use those as wedge issues, as if there isn't enough resources for everybody to go around. For everybody that's going around, there are enough resources. There's an artificial cap on who gets access to what, and as long as you get people looking at other human beings who are on their same level as potential competition for resources, they're never going to look at the gatekeepers to those resources as a potential problem. Okay. So those concerns were targeted and amplified by a white-led infrastructure of super hard line xenophobic anti-immigrant groups. And this was, we're talking about, 80s, 90s, 2000s. As the technology advanced, they found new ways to try to start seeding those. Okay. Person you want to look up is John Tanton, born in 1939. He kicked off in 2019. John Tanton. He is kind of the architect of the modern anti-immigration movement. I'm gonna go ahead and put him up on the Summer Jam screen here. So John Tanton was an actual white nationalist. Okay. He was white nationalist, anti-immigration activist, and he founded the Federation for American Immigration Reform, called FAIR. Okay. I'm gonna find a picture of him so that you guys can kind of see who I'm talking about. So John Tanton is really considered the father of a lot of anti-immigration movements, and he was ahead of his time in a lot of senses, because he was able to kind of see, this is what the play is in the future. This is what we need to be doing moving forward, in order to have the kind of society that he wanted to have. We're going to put him up on the screen here. Okay. But this is John Tanton. Okay. He was an ophthalmologist. I don't know what it is about ophthalmology and right-wing nationalism, but it is a thing. Okay. And so, and that was his baby. Like, anti-immigration stuff was absolutely his baby. I'm gonna go see if I can put that on the screen. I can't even make that any bigger. Oh well. But yeah, so you guys get a sense of who I'm talking about. That's John Tanton. Okay. He started the Tanton Network. Okay. And so that's where you had FAIR, which was the lobbying arm of his anti-immigrant white nationalist stuff. The CIS, which was policy, and PFLP, which was a progressive front that was supposed to specifically and narrowly target Black people. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself why he would be interested in targeting Black people. Why is this white nationalist interested in getting Black people enlisted in his belief structure? Do you think he's talking about you think he's thinking about the benefit of um, Black Americans? Is that something we honestly believe, that he was doing this because he really cared about Black folks in America? Is that something that we earnestly believe? And I question um, a lot of. I do question. I'll be honest with you. I do question a lot of the things that have grown from those seeds that he planted. Okay, I question people that will fall lockstep into that without questioning um, who was responsible for this stuff, who was responsible for how we interact with it. And so I'm doing this to get to the notes, because I have some pretty in-depth notes about John Tanton. Okay, so he brought up Black concerns about immigration, and they aren't fake or illegitimate because of how immigrants and Black people in America have been pitted against one each other. Labor competition, wage pressure, housing strain, and political neglect were all real issues. Okay, they're real and artificially used to maintain a power balance. Okay, what is documented is those concerns were intentionally targeted and shaped by white-led anti-immigration. I mentioned that. John Tanton, okay, Michigan-based ophthalmologist. He's considered the architect of the modern anti-immigration movement. And he wasn't just a donor, he was a strategist. He put his money in place in strategic places. And so documented, like this is the stuff like this. All right. And so Center for Immigration Studies, CIS, that was the public policy arm of what he was doing. Okay. It was founded in 1985. It's a policy think tank, including and producing a lot of anti-immigrant research. Okay. And it was designed to appear as neutral and technocratic, where they wanted to sterilize and wipe out a lot of the white nationalist leanings that inspired the think tank's existence. Okay. And it's heavily cited in media and policy making spaces because, if anything, a lot of corporate media will not check its sources. So specifically, if the source looks official, they won't see specifically where the stuff came from. Okay. He started the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Okay. This was founded in 1979. And that's kind of the lobbying arm. That's the ones that are sliding money in politicians' pockets. Okay. And so the intention of that was to leverage legislatures and the legislative process to create laws that were beneficial to their aims of destroying the immigration system in this country. Or even more insidiously, steering it so that it excluded Black and brown people, because that's kind of the direction it's heading right now. And then you have Progressives for Immigration Reform. That's PFIR. This is the one I'm talking about here. This was specifically targeted at the Black community. This is narrowly targeted. Look it up, John Tanton, PFIR. Okay. And so PFIR's main function was to translate anti-immigration arguments into progressive civil rights language. Okay. It's messaging. It's messaging. And I work in marketing. I understand how powerful messaging can be. You can get people to absolutely do things against their self-interest if you message it the right way. Okay. So they wanted to frame immigration as harmful to Black wages, harmful to Black employment, and harmful to Black political standing. They wanted to frame immigration as a zero-sum game that was working against Black people, as opposed to the gatekeepers who are holding all the resources hostage. And PFIR actively recruited Black folks online. This is where we're getting into a lot of the who is some of the money behind some of these FBA ADOS accounts. FBA is Foundational Black Americans. ADOS is American Descendants of Slavery. I am not casting aspersion. I'm not saying all of them are getting paid under the table, but there are specific ones that were tied to the PFIR, just because that's how internet money works, right? I've paid for ads. I've paid and boosted content and paid and increased the visibility of content. There was a lot of money flying around about 2017, 2018, all 2015, 2016. There was a lot of money flying around on Twitter with boosted posts. And a lot of it, that's where a lot of anti-immigration stuff started coming up. Okay. And I think the first person I saw actually get into a clash with it was Talib Kweli, and he had his crash out regarding that, where he ended up getting himself kicked off Twitter permanently. But a lot of the people he's interacting with were part of those movements. Okay. And so PFIR actively recruited Black spokespeople, funded Black framed arguments, and provided platforms that appeared left-leaning. So they did capture a group of Black leftists in there. And it's not to say, because they did a good job framing, they did a good job concealing who was actively in charge of this. Because if a lot of Black leftists found out that the person that was paying for their platform was a white nationalist, they would disavow that. And some of them actively have, while still embracing some of the talking points. Okay. And so this is documented in PFIR materials and mainstream reporting. Like, this is all, you can go look it up online. Specifically why Black communities were targeted with anti-immigration stuff. And that was kind of the seeds to the ADOS and FBA movements. Black voters were seen as a stable Democratic voting bloc, a coalition anchor, and a fracture point that they could splinter off. If they can get Black folks to rail against immigrants, then you can get Black folks to parrot some right-wing talking points and disseminate them in the community. And the idea of propaganda isn't necessarily to always win the argument. The idea of propaganda is to make sure more people hear it. Okay? The goal was not to turn Black folks into conservatives. The goal was to use immigration as a wedge issue to fracture coalitions and redirect economic anger away from capital and the state. I shouldn't have to explain why that matters to you. Okay. But it's classic wedge politics. It does not mean that every Black person critical of immigration is manipulated. I need to put those caveats in there. It does mean that funding, incentives, and messaging ecosystems do matter. These networks do matter. They exist and they matter. It's a lot of times you do have to follow the money, because it's really easy. The best place to hide a lie is between two truths, right? And as long as you can get something that sounds factually accurate, it's really easy to slide in a manipulative and dangerous lie, right? And outcomes do matter more than what the stated intent is. And so even if you have somebody who is Black solidarity and things along those lines, understand that when they're starting a lot of anti-immigration stuff, the seeds were planted online years ago by a white nationalist who did not have the best interest for Black people or any people that weren't white in mind. Okay. So you look at it like this. You got two groups of ants fighting inside the ant farm, while the person who owns the ant farm is staying invisible. All right. Let's see what we got. Advertisement. So that y'all ain't even going to see that in the comments. Don't worry about it. All right, let's make another super hard pivot. We're going to talk about Mojo. Last night I did a breakdown of Mojo, and I think I made a strong appeal to Marvel to hire your boy, to bring your boy into the fold, so that I can help them bring Mojo into the modern world. I don't know how it landed. I'm imagining that it didn't. Nobody sees this stuff, but we're going to talk about Mojo. Mojo is an X-Men villain who's kind of been on the decline for the last couple of years. And I think it's kind of a mistake because um, he is probably more relevant now than he has ever been. All right. So I'm gonna put him up on the Summer Jam screen. You're about to see what he looks like. Why can't I ever get a big version of these images, bro? I need a large image of Mojo so you can see. And you're going to see the Trump analogy. I made the Trump analogy last week. I'm not going to beat it to death, but the idea is Mojo is he comes from a world um, where media and messaging controls all aspects of uh, how people interact with one another. And the more viewers you have, the more people are paying attention to you. Um, the more power you can amass. Okay, and so I'm gonna throw him up on the board here. So we're talking about Mojo. So Mojo represents a character in Marvel that was kind of born during the 80s, and he was supposed to be a send up of um, cable television and how we consumed media. Okay, that's really what he represented. And um, as a result, I think people with the decline of cable television, Marvel's kind of figured, oh, he's not as important now. He's as important as he ever was. Here's Mojo. Of course, he's sitting on top of the X-Men. He is a recurring X-Men baddie. Okay. So Mojo is a media tyrant. And he rules the Mojo verse. He's from a race called the Spineless One, so he has to use a mechanical chair in order to get around. First appeared in Long Shot. Number 3 Long Shot was a limited series, and he was created by Ann Nocenti and Art Adams, and if I'm not mistaken, they were married. Um, and so let me see here. We're going to drop Long Shot number 1 on here because I do have that cover. Okay. So this is Long Shot number 1. Mojo debuted in Long Shot number 3. Long Shot was basically a built protagonist. Okay. So the core identity of Mojo is he's a parasitic system, and power comes from viewership and engagement. The more people that are watching his stuff, the more people that are viewing his content or watching the shows that he produces, that gives him more power, and power allows him to warp the reality of the Mojo verse. Okay, and so he warps it through his power, and then some super advanced technology, and then I think there's magic that's tied to it too. Okay. Mojo's powers, like I said, include reality manipulation, narrative control, but he's physically weak without these systems to support him. Okay. And so one of the idea is he made his debut and he's supposed to be a TV executive. He's supposed to be a send up of television executives. And Longshot was the manufactured protagonist who had powers of reality, or who had powers of luck manipulation, probability manipulation. And so things always kind of seem to turn out his way. He was given those powers because Mojo constantly put him in deadly situations. Let's jump forward a little bit. The X-Men kind of became targets of Mojo's fascination. So he was always kidnapping the X-Men, dragging him in the Mojo world, and putting him in super dangerous circumstances so that his audience will watch and consume them and give him more power. Okay. And so he abduct the X-Men all the time. And then the satire was he did a spinoff of the X-Men called the X-Babies. And the X-Babies were kind of Mojo's version of stand-in. So he didn't always have to kidnap the X-Men and have to get foiled on international, worldwide Mojo-verse television all the time. Okay. I guess I'm going to have to pull up a picture of the X-Babies too, right? So that we can see what we're talking about. Okay. But X-Babies were considered kind of, and it was a satire, right? It was a spinoff of the X-Men that Mojo created for his audience to watch. And he would put them in peril to, I think, is this the first version? I don't know if this is the first iteration of it, but they've done the X-Babies things lots and lots and lots and lots of times. I mean, this has been an ongoing theme in X-Men and Mojo comics. Like it's been persistent. And like I said, that's the satire piece. That's the fun piece of Mojo. And I think what happens is when we talk about him as an X-Men villain, that's the piece that people kind of focus on. So X-Babies, little versions of the X-Men that he can put them into dangerous situations. And I think one time it was he de-aged the X-Men. He de-aged them and made them younger at some point in the storytelling. Not quite sure. I can't quite remember how that framing mechanism worked. Okay. Now the modern era of Mojo, because you guys got to understand, back in the 80s, 90s, Claremont era, when Mojo was presented as actual existential threat to the X-Men, he was always there. He was kind of like the way I would say is he's kind of like the X-Men's version of Mr. Mixoplidic, Superman's magic genie that comes and torments him, pops in and makes his life a living hell, and they have to figure out how to get away from how to make him say his name backwards to send him back. That's kind of what Mojo represented. Okay. And so in the modern era, in the Krakoa era, they show him kind of as legacy media and decentralized platforms. And I think the way that Marvel can make Mojo relevant is think about how the attention economy works right now. If Mojo came up with a social media app that people on Earth used and people in the Mojoverse used, he could probably become omnipotent, like omnipotent, like he can have all the power. Because if they did that, he would have unlimited power, if you will. And so I think Marvel's dropping a ball by not utilizing, Mojo comes up with his own version of TikTok or comes up with his own version of YouTube, where it's constantly people in peril. And viewers watching him live stream very horrific things. I think that you could absolutely make Mojo a persistent threat to the X-Men once again, maybe even worth a crossover. God knows they need new crossover villains because we cannot do another rehash of Age of Apocalypse, y'all. Y'all did it with Sins of Sinister. You're doing it with Age of Revelation. Let's try it. Let's go back to the drawing board and do something else here. But I think Marvel, if you're interested, I will outline that entire story for you if you're interested. But I do think we could establish Mojo as an X-Men villain by utilizing social media, because think of it like this. A person on social media, like you can absolutely go viral on YouTube and have 300 million views and people on Facebook won't have any idea who you are. That's a very powerful thing. And since social media is super decentralized, it can be on any device, any phone. So everybody who has an internet connection can be subject to providing Mojo power. Okay. But yeah, the themes could be attention as currency, suffering as entertainment, and audience as accomplices. I really think that could be a compelling story that Marvel could be utilizing Mojo for. So let's ask the question: is Mojo evil or just a mirror of audience behavior? Okay. And who holds more power in these dynamics? Is it the person that's creating the questionable, the dangerous content, or is it the person that is consuming it? Okay. And is the villain Mojo in X-Men, is he a system? Is he an actual villain, or is he just the personified system with a face? Okay. On to the next. We're going to be talking about, since I'm on the superhero thread, I wanted a chance to sit down and geek out about one of my favorite interpretations of a superhero villain, and it's been difficult in modern like in the modern era. Marvel struggled with it, DC has struggled with it. Marvel, like from a movie standpoint, they always had a difficult time creating really compelling villains. And the shining examples of super compelling villains, in my estimation, I thought the way they did Zemo was an interesting take on the villain. I think they missed opportunity with Ultron and Age of Ultron to make him that level of compelling. But one of my favorite villains in modern cinema is Bane from The Dark Knight Rises. And yes, thematically, Dark Knight Rises had a lot of issues, but understand that Dark Knight Rises was really supposed to be um, a follow up to The Dark Knight, and it was supposed to be the trial of the Joker, and the chaos that ensued as they publicly tried the Joker. And since Heath Ledger died, they couldn't do that movie, and so they had to scrap the entire movie. And Christopher Nolan had to come up with an entire new movie. And so Bane ended up becoming the villain. And Bane was a very compelling villain because where Joker represented chaos, and so it sees the chaos, Bane used structure and order to absolutely dominate Batman and all of his allies. Like, he used order, he used systems, long-term planning, understanding human psychology, more cerebral than Batman. And so basically, Bane turned Batman into a blunt instrument in that movie. Batman's plan at the end of the movie to take down Bane was essentially, okay, so we're going to release all the Gotham City police, and they're just going to run in a straight line with batons and hit people with them. That was the plan. That was the extent of his plan. And then he was going to go run the fade with Bane. And that was the plan. There wasn't a lot of other planning that went into this entire thing. And so it put Bane in the position of strategist and put Batman in the position of the chaos or the blunt object who's going to overcome through brutal force. All right. I like that dynamic. I like that power inversion. The thing I didn't necessarily like was I don't like how they use Talia al Ghul in that specific role, because I almost feel like it diminished both characters. Okay. It diminished Bane because it made him seem like, oh, he's the person behind the person. He wasn't the one that was the mastermind behind all this. She was the one that masterminded all this. But then you look at it, when you look at Talia al Ghul in the comic books, she doesn't need all that to screw up Batman's life. She never needed all that to screw up Batman's life because she was equipped in her own way to do it. And so she didn't necessarily need to use a monkey's paw to do it. She could do it herself. And so I think you missed an opportunity with both characters to tell really interesting stories about how they pooled and used their resources. Okay. But I think Bane was a super interesting villain because Bane was dropping bars, bro. Like, the entire "Do you feel in charge?" Like, where he gently put his hand on bro's shoulder. Amazing. The way that they did that. And now we're going into the geek out session because that was a bar. And so I really enjoyed Bane's soliloquies while he's absolutely just stomping a mud hole in Batman and absolutely just beating him from pillar to post. The entire, you think darkness is your ally and everything. We sit in the movie like, oh, get him. Like, I'm cheering for Bane to beat up the main character. And now I will break you. I enjoyed all of that. And I think as a character, as a villain, he checked all the boxes because the way that they presented him, he was really this existential, all-encompassing threat to everything that Batman held dear. And I think that's the way you do it. And they didn't have to do a heck of a whole lot. They didn't have to give him blue blasty powers or anything. They just had to make him super competent. That's what it was. His superpower was competence. He could execute a plan and do it the right way. Okay. He attacked the symbols of Gotham and not just Batman physically. He attacked all the institutions in Gotham. And it's an interesting question. How much of a hero is Batman if he is also upholding these institutions that were corrupt within Gotham City? They knew the police department was corrupt. They knew the mayor's office was corrupt. But Batman's kind of working on their side. He's kind of helped them out. I know we got Jim Gordon in there, but he's still a piece of a corrupt system. And he's still one man in the piece of a corrupt system. And we know that changing the system from inside doesn't work. Okay. Bane weaponizes emotions like hope and fear and populism to expose the structural rot that was happening in Gotham. And um, he exposes the lies the heroes depended on. Like, that was dope. The entire Harvey Dent act. Um, you know, they used that to sweep up a bunch of criminals and stuff, but Harvey Dent was a murderer by the end of that movie. Okay. So he uses the lies the heroes depended on to keep the status quo running. That's why, for me, he's probably one of my favorite villains, because he's super effective in what he did. And it wasn't the generic, I'm really strong, I'm really powerful, and I have blue or orange or yellow blasty powers where I can blast things and shoot out blasts. Because that's kind of been the storytelling mechanism for a lot of Marvel and DC movie villains. Thinking about the Enchantress in the first Suicide Squad movie, Ronan the Accuser, weirdly enough, was just blue and blasty powers. Like, that's what his power was. He is more than that, but it was him shooting out blue blasty powers. Okay. And so I like villains where there's layers to what they do. You know, Bane didn't necessarily have complex motivations. He wanted to destroy Batman, he wanted to destroy Gotham City. That was his motivation. He had complex plans to execute his simple motivation. So that's why I think he's one of the best movie villains that we have. And so if you disagree with me, hit me in the comments. If you agree with me or you have others that you think or want to make other arguments, jump in the comments. Let me know. All right. So I do appreciate y'all tuning in. I'm going to wrap things up now. I do appreciate y'all jumping on the live stream. I had to redo it. Like I said, my brain was not engaged last night, and a lot of the stuff I wanted to say would not come out. So I'm going to drop this here. I will catch y'all. Have a happy new year. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to y'all later. Flirting while dad.